So Trouble is nearing the end of the first stage of her restoration, the strip down. This video is going to be a little different to the others so far. I'm actually not doing any work on Trouble myself. Instead, I'm taking Trouble to see a man called Dave. Who is Dave? While I load Trouble onto the trailer, let me explain a little more. When Ellie and I bought Trouble, it was no surprise to us that she was rusty. In fact, I wanted to buy a rusty car to practice my welding. I liked the idea of welding in a new seal here, fabricating a small patch for there, etc. What I hadn't bargained for was how rusty Trouble was. Trouble was so rusty that I was told she would never see the road again. I was even told by one person not to open her doors as she might collapse. It quickly became apparent that I was way out of my depth. There were question marks around how straight and structural she was, which meant she needed to be jigged. The 356 construction resembles a maze of panels. I wasn't familiar with the panel arrangement and half of Trouble's panels were missing. And to top it off, the thinnest steel I'd ever previously welded was 3mm thick. There was so much room for error, I decided to find an expert. I found Dave, a man who has previously built a 356 from nothing but a roof. Trouble may have been rusty, but I had a fair bit more than just a roof, so I felt like she was in safe hands. Once I'd finally loaded Trouble, it took a few attempts to get her straight. She was ready for her day out. You might think this would be plain sailing, but it wasn't, for a number of reasons. Firstly, although I had trailed a trailer before, I had never trailed a car on a trailer. I was pretty nervous and acutely aware I could easily fuck up my two favourite cars in the world. Secondly, as Trouble was half stripped down, she was a lot lighter than she should be for how her suspension was designed. As a result, she was sitting very high, which induced positive camber at the rear. The top of her wheels were pointing out and the bottom pointing in. This made strapping her down more difficult. Lastly, the weather. Trouble was rusty enough as she was. I didn't want to add to this by getting her soaked on the back of an open trailer. The day was overcast but dry, so we made a run for it. I feel like she enjoyed her journey, bouncing around on the back of the trailer, littering the roads with all her rust. 50 odd miles later, I successfully made it to Dave's unit without dropping Trouble off the back of the trailer. Once we arrived, we unloaded Trouble. My sister then found this monkey nut. Fascinated by how it had managed to survive both the journey and Trouble's rusting, she picked it up for safekeeping. I still have it. I have no idea where it had been hiding if the interior was completely stripped, but the bouncy journey must have shaken it loose from somewhere. Anyway, back to the story. Now we're at Dave's, you might be wondering, why is Trouble here? As you can see, I hadn't finished stripping her. She was still painted and nowhere near ready for bodywork. The reason I took her to Dave was because I wanted Dave to chop one or two pieces off her before I took her to be media blasted. And it was a lot easier to get her to Dave while she still had wheels. Why did I want some bits chopped off Trouble? I wanted to increase access to all of Trouble's panels and save unnecessary blasting time. The battery box here was so far gone that it was going to be replaced anyway, so there was no need to waste time and money getting it blasted. The floor was another example of this, and not having it in made access to underneath the dashboard and front bulkhead a lot easier.
Rolling back to the construction of the 356, a significant part of the car's body's strength comes from the box section seals and central tunnel. In fact, these provided so much strength that, unlike lots of other car manufacturers, instead of having to redesign the monocoque to make a cabriolet, Porsche could simply just cut the roof off.
These seals are made up of an inner side member and then an outer rocker or side member with a heater hose enclosed in the inside. Trouble's outer rockers were in a really bad shape and needed replacing completely. This was a blessing in disguise, as by cutting them off meant the media blasters would be able to access these otherwise enclosed areas and remove any rust which had formed. The inside of these seals were and are notorious to rust, especially in humid environments. This is a bit strange because of the heating tube that runs through them, but for a quick science lesson to explain. The heater tube would warm the air inside the box seal. When this warm air then comes into contact with the cold steel seal panels, it forms condensation on the steel panel. Because the inside of these seals was never painted, this water would quickly start causing them to rust. Some people refer to the heater tubes running through the sill of a 356 and those early 911s as an inbuilt type of cancer, which initiated from the inside out the excessive rot that lots of these cars suffer from. With the outer rocker removed, you can get a much better idea and understanding of the heater tube system that runs through the sill. This paper hose looking thing is the heater hose muffler, which is held in with an old school Jubilee clip. Sadly, the metal hose flanges or fixings, whatever you want to call them, either end of these paper hoses had rotten away, and in some places the paper hose had perished away, so I've had to replace these. Once Dave had finished cutting the floor pan and outer rocker off the passenger side of Trouble, he started on the driver's side. Some of these angles give you a much better idea of the extent of Trouble's rot. It wasn't necessarily a pretty sight to see, but removing these rotten panels was one of the first big steps to getting her bodywork back on track. Clearly, something other than geckos had decided to make Trouble their home. Hiding at the back of the seal was all this woody fluff. I guess back when Trouble's engine ran and the heater worked, this would have been nice and cozy. Maybe a fire hazard, but cozy nonetheless. Once Dave had finished, I had a pile of scrap metal, including trouble, to load onto the trailer. Right, okay. I'm going to beat everyone to it and address that big fat elephant in the room. I can already see it in the comments. You should have braced that car before you cut all of that metal out. Maybe you're right. Or maybe you're wrong. Maybe you're right, because if I did want to be belts and braces and make sure trouble didn't flex and move, twist, whatever you want to call it, before I cut out those pieces of very structural rust, I should have braced her. Yes. But, as I said, Porsche designed that car such that it had so much strength that they were able to cut the roof off without redesigning the seals and tunnel for the cab and the Speedster. Trouble, she still had her inner seals, she still had her tunnel and her roof. Yes, she was missing her outer rockers and her floor, but I figured with the inner seals, the tunnel and the roof, she was more than structural enough to go on the back of the trailer. Why you might be wrong in saying I should have braced Trouble before I cut all of those pieces of metal out? Well, as I've already said in this video, there were big question marks about whether Trouble was straight in the first place. As I wanted to take Trouble to Dave with her still on her wheels, there was no way for us to assess the alignment of Trouble before we did this work. She may have already been bent. Bracing her would have meant that I could have been bracing a misaligned car anyway. Nonetheless, before Dave started all his bodywork, he did put her on a jig. And, for a spoiler, I can tell you she was straight. Trouble didn't twist. If she had, I agree, it would have been an inconvenience and a bit annoying and more work for Dave. But at the end of the day, that would have only been an inconvenience for my sister's bank balance. So, not the end of the world. I hope you found this slightly different video interesting. If you did, please give it a like. If you have any questions about cutting out metal from a Porsche or anything that you've seen in this video, get it in the comments. And if you want to tell me that I should have braced the car before that, again, get it in the comments. Any engagement is good engagement. If you don't want to miss a second of Trouble's restoration, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.